there was a period when they were helping Iran with its nuclear program. They are doing much less of that now. Aside from the issue of arms sales, the Chinese sort of military presence in the Middle East is negligible. They have some peacekeeping role in Lebanon. I see nothing wrong in asking them to help with the Arab-Israeli conflict. The two things India and China have in common is they have good relations with everybody in the Middle East. Excellent relations with Israel, excellent relations with the Palestinians, excellent relations with Iran. You know, they don't have this colonial problem that the Europeans have had and the problem that we have as the hegemon. But the real area where the Chinese and the United States, it seems to me, are most likely to come into what I would call a more direct strategic containment arena is off the Chinese coast itself, because of Taiwan. I mean, oops. Well, I don't know what I did there. Well, you'll just have to sort of bear with me. It's the unresolved problem of Taiwan that is the most likely precursor for conflict between China and the United States, not these other issues at this point in time. So when we talk about containing China, I think we're really talking about containing China in the South China Seas and in the Pacific rather than the Indian Ocean. If the Chinese ever became a serious presence in the Indian Ocean, this is one area where I would defer to the Indians, because the Indians are not going to accept Chinese dominance of the Indian Ocean. They may accept it of the South China Seas, but the Indians regard the Indian Ocean as Indian. I mean, it's called Indian for a reason. And their strategic pretensions are as big and as dramatic as China's. And as one speaker at this meeting some of us were at this morning said, don't think India will ever play second fiddle to China, particularly in its own backyard. So the answer to your question, I really think, is that it's premature at the moment to talk about containing China in the Middle East, and if it ever came to that, I would think India rather than the United States would be the prime candidate.
Hi, I'm Ilan Pelek from Lafayette College and the Middle East Institute. On a number of occasions, you sort of came to the edge of talking about the role of India and China and so forth in the Arab-Israeli conflict, but you have never gone beyond the edge. So I wonder whether you sort of can develop it a little bit. You sort of suggested that having a Syrian-Israeli peace, for example, and of course there is already a Jordanian-Israeli peace, is very much in the interest of many of the countries in the region, and if you can further develop it, I think it would be very useful.
Well, look, I think it's a very interesting question. In fact, I devote a small chapter in this book specifically to Israel's relations with the Asian countries, of which the most important are India, China, Korea, and Japan. Both China and India have had increasingly good relations with Israel. They were not good to begin with for a whole host of ideological reasons, and the Indians for a long time were hung up on the notion that somehow the Israelis were occupying Palestinian territory and considered themselves to be sort of part of this third world movement. That all changed, essentially, when the Indians and the Chinese discovered, believe it or not, that Israel has a very advanced technical base, particularly in military areas. And the military relationship between China and India and Israel has been growing significantly. And I would say, I think I'm right in saying that those are the two largest markets for the Israeli advanced technology exports. This has led to problems with the United States. There was a huge fight during the Bush administration when the Israelis were proposing to sell the Chinese the Falcon airborne warning and control system, which the U.S. argued could be used against U.S. airplanes in the Straits of Taiwan if we ever got into a fight with the Chinese, and it was none other than Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith who led the fight against the Israelis. So, it was one of those cases where the neocons, told the Israelis, no, you can't sell this weapon, and the Chinese didn't like that particularly. So this relationship has gone on and grown at the same time that China and India have been doing excellent business with everybody else. It hasn't become a deal breaker as yet with any of the Arab countries or the Muslim countries. It might in the future, but I would say it's a case where neither India nor China today have strong ideological and emotional commitments to anyone, particularly in the Middle East, and that you can say that's cynical. But on the other hand, it means you don't have to take sides, and that can serve your interests.
Well, we have a question from the overflow room from a journalist, the Washington Diplomat, that relates to this, talking about how in recent years Israel has established diplomatic relations with India, China, and other Asian countries, and now has thriving business with them. And he asks, what are your thoughts on commercial opportunities with the State of Israel, especially if a solution can be found to the Arab-Israeli conflict? So perhaps just elaborate on other commercial opportunities if there is a peace.
I think most of Israel's trade is with East Europe and Asia. It's not with the Arab world. And if there were, yes. So in other words, I don't think the absence of peace between Israel and key Arab countries like Syria and Lebanon, I don't think that detracts from Israel's access to the markets where it has a niche, and that is East Europe and Asia. That's not to say that if there were not peace between Israel and the entire Muslim world, trade would not boom, because I think what the maps show more than anything else is how tiny the sort of little Arab-Israeli quadrant of the conflict is in comparison to the vast stretches of land elsewhere. And if you could imagine there being no barriers between Israel and Lebanon and Israel and Syria, open borders like you have between Britain, France, Germany, and the Benelux, I mean, you could get in a car, Tel Aviv at breakfast, and be in Beirut for lunch, Damascus for a high tea, and back to Jerusalem for supper. I mean, if the road systems were connected. So, yes, there would be a great, huge economic opportunities for both Israel and the Arabs and Iran if they resolved this conflict, but I don't think it fundamentally affects the current Israeli marketing efforts in Asia and Europe.